The truth about the K-129 incident does not begin in Moscow. It begins in a windowless concrete bunker off the coast of Norway at a NATO listening post designated Station X-ray. November 4, 1968, 0314 hours. The ocean is never truly silent, but for the sonar operators monitoring the SOSUS sound surveillance system arrays, the Barents Sea was unusually quiet that night. That silence was shattered by a single catastrophic acoustic event. It wasn't the rhythmic thrum of a propeller or the groan of shifting ice. It was a hard transient, a violent metallic impact registering off the scale, followed immediately by the sickening, crushing sound of a pressure hull imploding at depth. The operator on duty didn't just hear a submarine die, he heard something strike it. Tell us where you watch us from and subscribe to the channel. 12 hours later, the official Soviet news agency, TASS, released a short, sanitized statement. They reported that the K-129, a Gulf II-class diesel-electric submarine carrying 3 nuclear ballistic missiles, had been lost with all 98 hands during routine combat maneuvers. The Kremlin's official verdict was mechanical failure. A hydrogen explosion in the forward battery compartment caused a fire, leading to a loss of buoyancy. It was a plausible lie. It was clean. It was tragic. And, according to Declassified U.S. Navy Intelligence Memo number 4902, it was physically impossible. We now know that American intelligence analysts reviewed the SOSUS tapes within hours of the event. They found a critical discrepancy that contradicts the Soviet battery explosion narrative. A hydrogen explosion is an expanding force. It pushes walls outward, creating a low-frequency rumbling boom. The sound recorded on the tapes was different. The spectral analysis showed a high-frequency shear, the sound of high-yield steel being torn open from the outside. The timeline of the destruction was too fast for a fire. The K-129 didn't burn, it was crushed. Furthermore, the triangulation of the sound revealed a second signature. For 3 hours leading up to the disaster, the K-129 was being shadowed. The hydrophones picked up a faint, oscillating hum that matched no known NATO or Warsaw Pact propulsion system. The Soviets claimed their boat broke down, but the forensic audio suggests the K-129 was hunted, intercepted, and breached. The question that terrified the Joint Chiefs of Staff wasn't how the sub sank, but what was capable of catching a silent runner in the dark and tearing it open like a tin can. Investigation status: active. Next, we examine the vessel and the crew sent to their deaths.
To understand the anomaly, we must first rule out incompetence. The prevailing narrative in the West often dismisses Soviet hardware as rusting, unreliable junk. In the case of K-129, this is a fatal analytical error. The machine. The K-129 was a Project 629A, NATO designation Gulf II, strategic missile submarine. She was not a blunt instrument. She was a precise delivery system for the apocalypse. Measuring 320 feet from bow to stern, she carried 3 R-21 ballistic missiles in her sail. Each missile housed a warhead with a yield of 1 megaton, 70 times the destructive power of the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. This vessel was designed for one purpose: to vanish into the ocean's thermal layers and wait for the order to incinerate a violently specific list of American cities. When running on her electric motors at a depth of 200 feet, the K-129 was effectively a black hole in the water. No thermal bloom, no cavitation, just silence. The crew. The men inside the pressure hull were not conscripts. They were the Northern Fleet's elite. Commanding the vessel was Captain First Rank Vladimir Kobzar, a career officer known for his obsessive adherence to protocol. Intelligence files describe Kobzar as a mathematical disciplinarian, a man who checked his oxygen mixtures and battery levels with religious fervor. On the morning of November 4th, the K-129 was 70 days into a standard combat patrol. The psychological strain on the crew was immense, yet the ship's logs, recovered years later, show no drop in morale or operational efficiency. The discrepancy. This brings us to the critical flaw in the battery explosion theory. At 00 hours, 3 hours before the incident, Captain Kobzar transmitted a scheduled check-in burst to Fleet Command. The encrypted message was decoded by the NSA. It reported, "All systems nominal, batteries at 95% charge, reactor coolant stable, continuing patrol vector." The boat was in perfect health, the crew was alert, the batteries were stable. A submarine of this caliber, under the command of a veteran like Kobzar, does not simply spontaneously detonate 3 hours after a clean inspection. The K-129 was a predator in its own element. It was heavily armed, silent, and invisible. For it to be destroyed so quickly, it had to be engaged by something that could see through its stealth, something that didn't care about its nuclear payload. The crew thought they were the hunters. They were wrong. Investigation status: active. Next, we analyze the first contact with the ghost trace.
To understand the final moments of K-129, we must look at the acoustic environment surrounding the vessel. The ocean is transparent to those who know how to listen. November 4th, 1968. 01:15 hours. 2 hours before the implosion event, the SOSUS array at Naval Facility Point Sur detected a new contact entering Sector 4. In the declassified logs, this contact is not labeled as a vessel. It is designated as Trace X. The behavior of Trace X defied the standard rules of naval engagement. The speed anomaly. In 1968, the fastest nuclear submarines, the Soviet November class or the American Skipjack, could achieve burst speeds of perhaps 30 knots submerged. Moving at that speed creates a phenomenon called cavitation. The propeller blades spin so fast that they boil the water around them, creating a trail of bubbles that collapse with a loud, distinctive hiss. It is the sonic equivalent of a jet engine. Trace X was tracked moving at 72 knots. This figure was initially dismissed by analysts as a sensor glitch. A submerged object moving at 80 miles per hour should have been generating a cavitation roar deafening enough to be heard in Iceland. Yet Trace X produced no high-frequency hiss. Instead, the hydrophones recorded a rhythmic, ultra-low frequency pulse, under 10 hertz. It wasn't churning the water, it was displacing it with a propulsion method that left no wake. The pursuit. The logs show that at 0140 hours, Trace X did not simply pass the K-129, it hunted it. The contact made a hard course correction, a sharp 90-degree turn without decelerating. Inertia dictates that a vessel turning at that speed should drift or bank. Trace X turned with geometric precision, instantly locking on to the exact bearing of Captain Kobzar's submarine. This was not a biological echo. Whales do not travel at 70 knots. This was not a tectonic anomaly. Earthquakes do not change course. For the next 90 minutes, the U.S. Navy listened as this silent, high-velocity shadow closed the distance to the Soviet missile carrier. The distance between the hunter and the prey shrank from 40 miles to 4 miles. The K-129 was running silent, its crew believing they were invisible. But down in the dark, something had found them, and it was closing in with a mechanical, predatory intent. Investigation status: active. Next, inside the K-129, the crew realizes they are not alone. We now move from the cold data of American listening posts to the reconstructed timeline inside the K-129. Based on the salvage logs and standard Soviet operating procedure, we can piece together the final minutes of command decisions in the control room. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and write your thoughts about this story. November 4, 1968, 02:30 hours. Sonar operator Senior Seaman Lavrov, manning the MG-10 hydroacoustic station, likely picked up the first sign of trouble. On a diesel-electric submarine, the area directly behind the propeller is known as the baffles, a blind spot where the submarine's own engine noise masks everything else. An enemy submarine can hide there, following indefinitely. Lavrov didn't hear a screw turning. He heard a masking tone, a synthetic frequency designed to harmonize with the K-129's own engine rhythm. But the pitch was off by a fraction of a hertz. He alerted Captain Kobzar. Contact in the baffles, range close, 0 bearing. The maneuver Captain Kobzar, a veteran of cat-and-mouse games with NATO, executed the standard countermove known in the West as a Crazy Ivan. At 02:45 hours, Kobzar ordered a hard rudder turn to starboard while simultaneously reversing engines. This violent maneuver is designed to swing the submarine around instantly, clearing the blind spot. Any trailing American submarine would be forced to take evasive action to avoid a collision, exposing its position. The K-129 swung 90 degrees in under 30 seconds. The crew braced for the sound of an American propeller thrashing in panic. The anomaly. There was no panic. According to the acoustic shadow recorded by SOSUS, Trace X did not overshoot, it did not bank, it did not collide. When the K-129 ripped into its hard turn, the object mirrored the movement with 0 latency. It stopped its forward momentum of 72 knots instantly, a feat that would liquefy the crew of any human-made vessel due to G-force deceleration, and hovered perfectly off the K-129's beam. The Hunter had anticipated the move. Inside the Soviet sub, the active sonar pinged the water. It didn't return the metallic echo of a Sturgeon-class submarine. It returned a soft echo, indicating a hull composed of material that absorbed sound waves rather than reflecting them. Kobzar wasn't dealing with a NATO patrol. He was staring at a technological impossibility that had just defied the laws of inertia to remain locked on his flank. The Hunter had stopped playing. It was time to feed.
In naval warfare, depth is safety. Changing depth requires time. Ballast tanks must be blown or flooded, planes must be angled. It is a slow, heavy process. November 4th, 1968, 03:10 hours. According to the SOSUS telemetry, Trace X stopped hovering. It dropped beneath the K-129 to a depth of 400 meters, then executed a maneuver that acoustic analysts initially labeled a sensor error, a vertical excursion. The object ascended 240 meters in 6 seconds. To put this in perspective, a modern torpedo moves horizontally. This object moved vertically against the immense pressure of the ocean at a speed of 90 miles per hour. It didn't glide, it shot upward like a reverse missile, stopping abruptly exactly level with the K-129, just meters from the hull. Then came the weapon. It was not an explosive warhead, it was a frequency. At 03:12 a.m., NATO hydrophones registered a single, focused sonic pulse peaking at 230 decibels. In the atmosphere, sound dissipates. Underwater, water is a non-compressible medium. It transmits shock waves with lethal efficiency.
A sound of 200 decibels is enough to rupture lung tissue. At 230 decibels, the sound wave becomes a physical hammer. Forensic pathology reports from similar high-intensity acoustic trauma cases suggest the crew of the K-129 did not die from drowning. When that pulse hit the submarine, it passed through the steel hull without breaking it. Steel conducts sound faster than water. But inside the air-filled compartments, the wave slowed down and amplified. For the 98 men on board, the air inside the sub instantly turned into a concussion weapon. Soft tissue would have liquefied, eardrums and capillaries would have burst simultaneously. The bridge crew likely died before they hit the floor, their nervous systems overloaded by a shock wave that left no burn marks, no shrapnel, and no trace. The K-129 was now a ghost ship. The engines were running, the lights were on, but the crew was neutralized. But Trace X was not finished. The pulse was just the studding blow. Now that the prey was silent, the hunter moved in for physical contact.
The ocean floor is the ultimate crime scene, cold, dark, and perfectly preserved. November 6, 1968, 1400 hours. 48 hours after the acoustic event, the Soviet salvage catamaran Kommuna, a vessel dating back to the Tsar's Navy, arrived on station. The mission was officially listed as equipment recovery. In reality, it was a coroner's inquest. The K-129 lay at a depth of 160 meters, listing 30 degrees to port. Visibility was near zero. Soviet deep-sea divers, operating in heavy pressurized suits, descended to assess the hull. The forensic observation. What the divers reported back to the surface dismantled the official battery explosion theory permanently. In a battery explosion, the pressure wave originates from the inside. It pushes the hull plating outward. The metal jaggedly tears apart, blooming like a flower. There is scorching, carbon scoring, and debris scattered for hundreds of meters. The K-129 showed none of this. The divers located the damage on the starboard side of the fourth compartment, the missile control center. It was a single, terrifyingly geometric aperture. Shape, roughly circular, approximately 2 meters in diameter. Deformation, the high-yield steel plating, designed to withstand the crushing weight of the ocean, was bent inward. The metal was not melted by heat, it was not shattered by impact, it was folded back, cleanly and deliberately, as if the steel had the consistency of wet cardboard. The mechanical impossibility. The K-129 was built with double hull construction. To breach the interior, a projectile must penetrate the light outer hull, the water ballast gap, and the 30mm pressure hull. A torpedo impact would have left a massive, irregular crater and explosive residue. A collision with another submarine would have left paint scrapings and a long horizontal gash. The hole in the K-129 was a puncture wound. The salvage report, classified top secret until the fall of the Soviet Union, noted that the edges of the breach were smooth. There was no chemical residue. The force required to punch a clean 2-meter hole through localized armor at that depth requires a focused pressure of 50,000 psi. There was no machine in the human arsenal of 1968 capable of generating that kind of focused force underwater. The K-129 hadn't crashed. It had been opened. Something wanted inside.
The physical wreckage tells us how the K-129 died, but it was the CIA's covert recovery operation in 1974, Project Azorian, that told us why. While the public story was that the Hughes Glomar Explorer failed to raise the submarine, declassified documents confirmed they successfully recovered the forward section of the vessel. Inside the crushed sonar room, technicians salvaged a magnetic reel-to-reel audio tape. It is designated item number 74B9. The audio is degraded by salt water and pressure, but digital restoration has isolated the final 60 seconds of the crew's lives. The transcript, 03:13:10. The background is filled with the rhythmic ping of active sonar. The voice of sonar operator Lavrov is heard, breathless, verging on panic. Target is closing, range 400 meters, depth variable. It doesn't have a screw signature, Captain. It sounds like humming. Captain Kobzar's voice cuts through. He is calm, authoritative, the voice of a man trying to maintain order in chaos. Torpedo room, fire tubes 1 and 2, manual solution, shoot down the bearing. A sharp mechanical grinding noise drowns out the voices. This matches the SOSUS data of the vertical excursion. The object has moved from beneath them to right beside them. Lavrov screams, clutching his headset. High frequency! It's jamming the anomaly. At 03:13:55, the tape records a sound that defies biological or mechanical classification. It is not the roar of an engine. It is a multitonal, oscillating shriek, similar to a dial-up modem, but amplified to ear-shattering levels. Forensic audio analysts identify this as the 230 decibel pulse. On the tape, you hear glass shattering in the control room. You hear the wet, heavy thud of men collapsing as their equilibrium is destroyed. But the most disturbing segment is the final 4 seconds. After the pulse, silence falls. The engines are still humming. Then a new sound begins. It is localized and intimate. It is the sound of metal stressing, the groan of the pressure hull being manipulated. Then Captain Kobzar's voice is heard one last time, barely a whisper, recorded by the microphone dangling near the deck. He isn't giving an order, he is making an observation. It's not a vessel, it's an eye. It's looking at us. 03:14:04. The tape ends in a violent burst of static as the water rushes in.
The tragedy of the K-129 is not that 98 men died. It is that their deaths were used to seal a pact of silence between two superpowers who hated each other. The geopolitical anomaly. In 1974, the CIA launched Project Azorian. They built the Hughes Glomar Explorer, a massive salvage ship ostensibly designed to mine manganese nodules from the ocean floor. Its true purpose was to lift the K-129. The operation cost $800 million, more than the budget of the Apollo moon landings. The official narrative states the CIA wanted the Soviet nuclear codes and cryptographic machines. This explanation fails the logic test. By 1968, the codes from 1969 were obsolete. The missiles were outdated. Why spend nearly $1 billion to recover trash? Unless the target wasn't the submarine itself. Intelligence analysts now believe the primary objective of Project Azorian was to recover the hull section containing the breach. The United States government needed to study the physical evidence of the weapon that had opened a titanium-reinforced hull like a soft fruit. They needed to know if the Soviets had developed a new underwater physics. When they raised the wreck, they realized the truth. The Soviets hadn't built the weapon. They were the victims of it. The burials. The 6 bodies recovered by the CIA were buried at sea with full military honors. The ceremony was filmed, but the autopsy reports remain classified Level 1, presidential eyes only. Rumors persist that the radiation levels in the tissues were consistent not with reactor leakage, but with exposure to a high-energy particle source unknown to 1970s science. The final assessment.
50 years later, the K-129 file remains the most disturbing anomaly in naval history. We have a submarine moving at 72 knots without cavitation. We have a sonic weapon capable of liquefying a crew instantly. We have a predator that hunted a nuclear-armed vessel and dissected it. If this was American technology, the U.S. wouldn't have needed to steal the wreck. If this was Soviet technology, they wouldn't have lost the boat. The evidence points to a third option, one that neither Washington nor Moscow is willing to admit. We treat the oceans as a transit zone, a place to hide our weapons and play our war games. The K-129 incident suggests that the ocean is not empty space. It is territory. And on November 4, 1968, Captain Kobzar and his crew didn't suffer an accident. They trespassed. Case status: permanently classified. File closed. If you like this topic, subscribe to the channel and like this video.